Okay, let's see. Nope. All right. Hey everyone. So this is our first live video in on the Facebook group. So I'm gonna try to have my computer set up at the same time so that if you have questions, I can see them on the computer, because the camera is going to be hopefully propped up so that y'all can see what I'm doing. So welcome. We're going to be having a little fun today with watercolor. It's my favorite medium ever. Hey guys. And because it like has potential to do so many fun things. So one of the lessons that the kids have the most fun with is what we're going to do today. And that is just like a demonstration of what you can do with watercolor. When I did this with one of the classes, they went home and they got out their salts and got out their watercolors and were showing all their parents about what they could do with it. So it really is a lot of fun. Let's just get started. What I want to do first is show you what I'm using, the materials that I'm using, and then we'll get started on the techniques. So we're going to be making like a quilt, kind of like a quilt of 12 different squares that have different techniques in them, yeah. So let me show you what the materials are. Let me flip my camera around. So this is what I use for watercolor painting. This is my palette. I know it's super messy, but you know, what artist isn't? And what I use are these tube watercolor paints normally when I'm doing painting for myself. And there's 3 different kinds that I have here. This one is Blick brand, and it's probably my favorite. It comes in a little bit bigger of a tube, so it lasts longer. But watercolor paint lasts a very long time. Even these smaller tubes. This is Grumbacher Academy watercolor, and this one is Winsor & Newton Cotman watercolors. They're a little less expensive, but they're smaller, and so that's why they're a little less expensive. But you only need like a pea-size amount to do anything really that you want to do. So, and what's nice about these watercolors is that once you put them in the tray and they dry, the next time you come back to it, you can wake them up with more water. So kind of like similar to, you know, if you use the Crayola watercolor pan sets, that you can wake them up with extra water. So that's what I use when I'm normally doing painting myself. We're going to put those away because we're not going to use those today. I just wanted to show you what some options were. What we're going to use today is what I use in class with students, and that is liquid watercolor. This is my favorite thing of all time. One of the best art supplies that has ever been created is liquid watercolor. It's basically concentrated color in liquid, so you don't have to add any extra water to it. And this is really fun for students because all they have to do is dip their brush in and go. And it's really brilliant color. It's very concentrated, and it's really fun to use. So that's what we're going to be using today. Again, I use the Blick brand most of the time, and it's a really nice quality brand. So to use them, I just put them in a little circular palette. I have my water. For brushes, I typically like to use bamboo brushes, but you can use any type of brush that you have. In class, we don't use bamboo brushes. We use like a natural hair bristle brush, but again, use any type of brush that you have. We're going to use, I'm going to use the bamboo brushes today. I also have just some other things that we're going to play with. Rubber cement, which is going to it's going to act as a masking fluid. I'll explain that when we get to that point. We have coarse kosher salt. This is what I'm using. You could also use sea salt, but I find that kosher salt, the Morton kosher salt works the best for this. So that's just what I have in this little bag here. I also have some black calligraphy ink. That is Chinese calligraphy ink. You don't have to use this. I just like to use it if I'm going to use black because it gives it a really intense color versus the liquid watercolors are a little bit not quite as intense. So if I'm going to use black, especially for the straw blowing that we're going to do, I have a straw, then that one works really well to give it a really intense color. I also have just some Elmer's glue and some oil pastels and some crayons and some wax. I'll show you all those. Let's just go ahead and get started so you can see what we're doing. Let me try to balance my camera. I took the other thing I was using for my other videos back to school, so hopefully this will work. Okay. All right. Okay. Before you start with any paints, you're just going to divide your paper into 12 sections. You can use a ruler to divide it out. I'm not going to use a ruler. I'm just going to kind of eyeball today. So that's 3 vertical lines straight up and down, and then 2 horizontal. I think you guys might be backwards from seeing it a different direction. That's okay. All right, I'll start up here because that's your top one so that you can see what I'm doing. I also have tape today. What I like to do is put tape around the outside of my edges just to give it a nice, clean, crisp white edge. And the tape serves as also to help the paper not curl up. Often you'll find that it curls up when you use watercolor paint. So the tape helps that to not happen. You can also use staples. I used to use staples in college, but we just use tape now. It's super easy. Who doesn't have painting tape lying around? I don't know if this is going to stay or not. Maybe I need to put a little piece of tape on its own so it stays put. Okay. All right, the first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to start with the painter's tape, and we're going to be creating what is called a resist. So this is going to be a tape resist, and when I use tape, because the edges are so crisp, I don't like that. So what I'm going to do is just kind of rip it in half lengthwise so that you have smaller pieces and they're a little more jagged, which I think is more interesting. So I'm going to put them on my paper just like this and just make sure the edges are nice and pressed down. This might not be new to some of you. You may have done this before, but this is just called a tape resist. Lots of times you can do this to make trees, like birch trees. So however many pieces you want on there. I might just crisscross. They're not going to be trees today. They're just going to be a design. Okay, so I'm going to leave that alone for just a second, and we'll come back and paint it in a minute. But in the next square, I'm going to use my rubber cement because I want it to dry. So while we're doing the other ones, this one will dry before I come back and paint over top of it. So the rubber cement acts, like I said, as a masking fluid. And masking fluid is an expensive art supply that you don't really need to buy because rubber cement does the same thing. But it essentially, you paint it on the paper and it keeps the paint from sticking to that spot on the paper. So wherever I put the rubber cement, the paint is not going to stick to and it's going to be white. So similar to the tape, wherever the tape is, the paint isn't going to stick to it and it's going to be white. So I might just use a few dots here and there, maybe some squiggles. And then we're just going to let this dry. So just make some shapes or some squiggles or dots and just kind of let it dry. We'll come back to it. Now, you want to use an old brush, not a nice brush, because it'll ruin your brush. You can't wash it off. So I just used a cheap brush for that one. And this is my rubber cement brush, so I don't ever use it for painting anymore. It's just for rubber cement. In the next one, I'm going to use glue because, again, it's going to dry. It's probably not going to dry in the time we have today. I'll have to come back another time to do it. That is totally fine. It's going to be similar to the rubber cement or the tape, but it's going to give it a different look. If you just kind of draw with the tip of the glue like it's a paintbrush or a pencil, and you're going to make these lines, and then you're just going to let them dry, and you're going to come back over top and paint over top of them when they're dry, and that gives it a really cool effect. Okay, so now let's see. Can I have that? That's what I was looking for.
What are you having?
Thank you.
What?
Sorry, somebody hijacked my spray bottle. Okay, we're going to use a technique called wet on wet, and that is essentially where you wet the paper first. This had a little bit from the bottles of the watercolor paint, but you're just going to wet it first, which is plain water. And then what you can do is take your brush into your liquid watercolors. And sometimes they even tell the students just get some paint on your brush and drop it onto the wet area. And it's going to be like spread and be really cool.
That's cool.
So that is one way that you could do wet on wet. If you drag your brush through it, it's just going to give it a really soft line and versus a hard line if you're using regular paint on dry paper. Okay, so now we're going to use our salt. I'm going to pick a color and just paint the entire section. This is wet on dry instead of wet on wet. Again, it's going to give it a slightly different look than wet on wet. With salt, you can do wet on dry or wet on wet, and each one will be slightly different. You're just going to sprinkle your salt all over that section. And what happens is the salt pulls up any water or pigment on the paper. And so when it's dry, you'll have a little starburst that's left. And then you'll just brush off the salt. And it looks really amazing. The students love to do that because it's almost like magic. The salt just kind of soaks up the water and it leaves a little white burst behind. Okay, let's go ahead and paint our tape one so that it can dry too. And we can pull the paint or the tape off when we're done. You're just going to go right over top of the tape. And that's why we use the oil pastel to draw our lines, because the oil pastel does help the paint from running into the other squares. This one did run a little bit, but that's okay. So I'm just going to use a few different colors. We're going to make it look like a, I don't know, fire. Alright. Okay, so let's move on. In this square, we can actually use oil pastels to create designs, and that's another type of resist painting. It's oil pastel resist, and so you can use all kinds of colors with that. So I'm just going to pull out a few colors and just make a few scribbles. We're going to use our primary colors on that. Okay, so you're going to make your designs, and then you can just, again, like we did with the tape, you're going to paint just straight over top of it. And the oil pastel shows through. So wherever the oil pastel is, the paint does not stick to it. So that wherever you have oil pastel, that will show right through the paint. The kids also really love to do this. We did several projects where we did this. One of them was a Kandinsky project where they did drawing and shapes all over the paper while we listened to music, which is what Vasily Kandinsky would do, and then they painted over top with liquid watercolor. And then they printed their name on top, so it was kind of a name painting. It was really fun. But that one's done, so let's move on. What I'm going to do is paint a little section, and then I'm just going to let it dry, because I really want to come back with the straw and blow some areas with the straw, and that will give it almost like it's almost like trees or tree branches that are kind of cascading up. So let's see. All right. So something else that you can do, actually I might do that on this one. I'm going to take the end of that brush that I used for the rubber cement, and I'm just going to scratch through it. And when you scratch through it, the paint kind of seeps into those lines. So let's make a few hearts, and it makes the lines just slightly darker than the paint. So you can get some really fine details just by scratching through with the end of your brush. Okay, in the next section, we are going to use something similar to the oil pastel, but it's going to just be a regular crayon. And this one I'm going to just use a white crayon for. And you may have done, again, something similar maybe for coloring Easter eggs. Oftentimes I'll put like a white crayon in with the Easter eggs, and then you color on the Easter egg, and then when you dye it, you have all of the white area showing through. So I'm just going to make a few almost like stars. I think I'm going to make this look like a starry night with stars. Need some Saran Wrap. Yes, thank you. My son is taking my spray bottle and spraying all over the place, and I said, go get me something, because we need to be more helpful.
I'll refill that with some water.
No, I just need Saran Wrap.
It's out of water.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Okay, so as you can see, where I did the stars, with my paint back over top, then you see the white showing through. And the paint doesn't stick to anything that was white. Okay, I'm just going to leave it like that, and then I want to show you something. If I go like this with a spray bottle, and just like that, then it also leaves a few little splashes here and there. One time, my youngest son did a painting with liquid watercolor, and we let it dry, but then we accidentally left it out in the rain, and it had drops of water all over it, and when it dried, it was really cool because it left little white spots all over the painting. So okay, let's see, moving on. Something else that you can do is use wax, like Crayon Resist wax. This is just like the wax you buy in the grocery store it's paraffin, I think is the wax that it is. But it will also resist the paint when you use it. It's just not going to be as sharp of a line, and it's kind of more of a feathery line. So if you just kind of scratch over the paper with your wax, and then you're going to get your paint. See how it's not a sharp line, but it's a little softer. It's still going to do the same thing though. It's going to resist any of that paint. Okay. All right, so we've done, just to recap, we've done tape resist. This is rubber cement, which acts as the masking fluid. And I think it might be dry, so I could probably go ahead and paint over it. What color should we use? Maybe yellow? And you'll see. Okay, maybe red so we can see it better. See, anywhere that I painted that rubber cement is going to be white. So a lot of the concepts are really similar. I have a stink bug on my palette. Ew. Okay. A lot of the concepts are similar, right? Like using crayon or oil pastel or wax or rubber cement. It's all a form of resist. It's resisting the paint from sticking to the paper. Okay, let's see. Caleb went to get me some Saran Wrap because I forgot it inside. But while he's doing that, let me show you. Let me just try to move that. Thank you.
It's so much nicer to have that thing that they...
All right. So for the Saran Wrap, you're going to paint a square just with whatever you want. Maybe do some dots on it. A little bit of blue maybe.
Come now.
See how really brilliant this liquid watercolor is? It just, like, it's so intense. I love it. And I didn't have to add any extra water to it. It just comes like that in the bottle. A little bit goes a long way too. I mean, it really lasts forever. Not forever, but a very long time. Okay, so with this one, you want just a really wet surface. And you're going to take your Saran Wrap and kind of crinkle it up just a little bit and lay it on top. Just like that. And you let it dry. And when you pull it off, then wherever those little creases are, the paint kind of collects there. And it leaves this really amazing design. Okay. All right, so let's do the straw blowing. I am going to use a little bit of the black, but I'm going to maybe put some other colors as well. Can you guys see? Can you see this square right here? Oops. Crashing down. Attach that a little bit better. Sorry about that. Okay. So I did put a little bit of that Chinese calligraphy ink, but I'm also going to put just some other colors. And for this, you just drop it onto your paper, just like that, in little drops. And what I was really sad about with this quarantine and virtual learning was that one of my favorite lessons to do with the kids is a Japanese cherry blossom lesson with straw blowing, and they love it, and they all turn out so beautiful. And we were just going to line the hallways with these Japanese cherry blossoms, but we didn't get to do that, so maybe next year. But this is the technique that I have them do for that. We do a dry brush on the background, which is just where you don't get a lot of water on your brush, and you just kind of quickly do the background with dry brushing. I might show you that in this square. And then you kind of drop the paint on the paper just like this. You take your straw and you get down really close to the paper and you blow upwards. I might have had too much on it for this little of a space, but you can kind of get the idea. And if you really get down and work these little areas, and it makes it just really spindly, like a tree. So that is straw blowing. Hopefully that'll stay on there, just like that. Okay, we have one more square. What did I say that I was going to do? I don't remember at the moment. But let's see. What should we do? Well, I have tissue paper because I can show you that. You can use tissue paper on your paper. Normally I use white. I didn't have any here at the house. I have it in my classroom and I didn't bring any with me. But you would use white tissue paper and glue it on just with regular school glue and just kind of crinkle it up a little bit. We can do that, but then you kind of have to wait till it dries before you can paint over top of it. But we'll just do a little bit of that. How about that? And then once that's dry, you can paint over top, and it also gives it kind of a crinkly look. This is colored tissue paper, so it may be a little bit of a different effect instead of just white, which is fine. Okay, I'll just do that, just like that. What did I say I was going to do in this last one? I don't remember. You can also use a palette knife to put down paint with, but that is mostly for if you have like the tube watercolors like I was showing you in the beginning, not necessarily the liquid watercolors. Okay. Oh, I know what I was going to do. All right, so I'm going to paint, this is dry, or wet on dry, not dry on dry, wet on dry. Again, to do, if your paper was wet first, this would be a very soft line. Let me show you. If the paper's wet first, I'm just going to spray some water. And then that is a much softer line than this one. This is very harsh. So it just depends on kind of what you want, what you're trying to paint. If you want it to be really harsh or very soft. And the paint does bleed together, so keep that in mind. Now, what I'm going to do is take my spray bottle and just kind of spray it a little bit and just kind of watch it bleed together, because I think that can oftentimes give a really interesting thing. Oftentimes with liquid watercolors, things happen that you didn't plan on happening. And Bob Ross calls them happy accidents, and I think that's really super fun. So it creates happy accidents. I think I'm going to sprinkle a little bit more salt in this one, just because there's a lot of wet there, and the salt can help soak that up. And if you can kind of see how the salt is creating these little starburst places. So when it's completely dry, you'll brush that off, and you'll see all those little spots that had the salt. Okay, let's try to pull off the tape, and sometimes if it's really wet still, you can't see it very well, but we'll try. Just see, that one didn't work. See how it just resisted? Anywhere I put the tape and I'm pulling off the tape, you should wait till it dries, but then you have the lines where you put the tape. This is still too wet to paint over, but when that dries completely, I'd paint over that. And I'll post a picture of it after it's all dry and completely done. Okay, so let's kind of go back over what we did today. We did tape resist. Anywhere you put the tape, you paint over it, then it stays white. We also did rubber cement resist, like masking fluid. This is just regular glue that you just draw on it with glue. And then when it's dry, you go back over top with paint. This was wet on wet, so you get your paper wet first, and then you can drop color or you can brush color, and it just kind of all bleeds together and looks really beautiful. This was salt, and so you're going to get your paper really saturated with color. Either get it wet first or just put a lot of paint on it till it's really wet. And then you just sprinkle salt, coarse kosher salt, all over it. And that, again, this is the one that I used for that. Oil Pastel Resist. This one, This one I think we did wet on wet, and then we scratched through it with the end of our brush. This one was Crayon Resist, and I also sprinkled a little bit of salt on that. This is Wax Resist, so with paraffin wax. This was Saran Wrap, and then straw blowing, and we did a few things in this. Tissue paper, 'cause that can add the texture to your paper before you paint over top of it, but again, you should let it dry before you paint it. And then this is wet on dry, and then just sprayed with a squirt bottle of water to just kind of see it blend together. Those are the watercolor techniques I have for you today. There are more that I haven't shown you. There's lots of different things that you can do with it. Just what I love is to just kind of play around and see what you can do and see what you can make, and the accidents that happen, just go with it. So thanks for watching, guys. I hope you all are doing well, and yeah, we'll see you some over the summer, but have a great summer. Thanks. Bye-bye.